This show is brought to you by the Garden Gurus and Evergreen Garden Care. Evergreen Garden Care and their market-leading brands are some of the most trusted consumer brands within the garden care market. They Garden Express are Australia's leading mail-order gardening service, offering a wide range of quality garden products. Each week on the Garden Gurus Live, the team at Garden Express will share a weekly offer. So make sure after today's show you jump online and visit their website.
Isn't it so much better when I unmute the microphone? Sorry, it's Trevor Cochrane. Welcome to Garden Gurus Live. It's a beautiful Tuesday morning. Thanks very much for your patience. For those of you who would normally tune into us on a Monday, we had a long weekend over here in WA. It's a fairly big weekend with AFL Grand Final, the Perth Royal Show launching, and some quite reasonable weather with a little bit of rain in between. Now, all over the country at the moment, we are seeing rain, with probably the exception of Darwin, who's 33 degrees today, maybe a shower or two in the afternoon. The rain is a wonderful thing this time of the year in the garden. As the temperatures are warming up, soils are warming up, plants are growing, the daylight hours are getting longer, and you will see some great results. But the key to the whole thing is making sure we have consistent moisture levels in our soil. So it's not such a bad thing if we're getting a little bit of rain out there. Now, I would like to thank Darren Senor and Joan Harris for filling in for me last week. That was a great effort on their behalf, and I hope you enjoyed the show. We love Jo. She's really talented lady when it comes to horticulture. Knows everything about it, and got a great garden centre. And Darren is one of WA's finest landscapers. He's a real plants man and worked in production nurseries when I was a young fellow doing the same thing. So we've been, I suppose, over the years all working very closely together, and I thought it was great that they were able to share some of their knowledge with you. Now, today we have a fantastic program for you. Do you have tomatoes growing in your garden? Love the Gardens. Greg Neighbour will be joining us very soon to share some tips, because getting tomatoes off to the best possible start is the difference between a great crop and a very ordinary crop. Garden Express will join us. I think we've got David Van Berkel. He's got a very rare plant. I can't wait to share it with you because I know what it is. And this one is one of those collectibles for indoors that'll just blow your mind. If you can get your hands on it, well done. And I'll share my plant of the week. And it's a very seasonal one when it comes to these things. This is, of course, about answering your garden questions. So please post your garden questions and queries. Put them into the comments. Let us know where you're from, what state, what city or town. And if you like what we're doing, please hit the like button. It shares it with all your friends too. We've got some great gifts to give away, some little presents for questions being asked. Of course, our classic, which is Mr. Fothergill's seeds. Very timely that it would be tomatoes and a whole bunch of veggies that do need to go into the ground now. Now is the best time to be planting seeds. And we will also obviously look at a book for you. I've got a great copy of Delish that I will find a copy of for you. It's somewhere up on the shelf behind me, actually. And you can see it just above my head. And I'll give you a copy of that for the best question of the day. So please send them in. Now, you can do that also via YouTube. So there's no limit. Send them to us, and I'll do my best to answer them. Let's fly into the questions. The first one, we're not sure where you're from. Vanish is the name you've given us. Recently got an ornamental pear tree. Now the flowers are now withering. I'm not sure if it's got blossom blight or if this is normal. So ornamental pear trees will flower for a short period of time, then the flowers will wither and fall off, and you should end up with a sea of white petals around the base of that tree. I don't think there's any problem with it. We do have that photo that we have popped up. Did we pop that up? Yep. So you can see, I think this is completely normal. It doesn't look like there's any problem. And what you're going to see now is a lot of foliage appearing. It'll take off. Paul from Queensland, another one, sent us a photo. Fantastic. My shrub has been growing well for the last 4 years, and it is now struggling. We've had a lot of rainfall earlier in the year. Can I recover it by consistently watering? And what would be a good fertilizer? Well, I'm just having a look for that shrub, and I think it's very, very difficult to establish exactly what's gone wrong there because it really is suffering, Paul. It's highly unlikely that that plant is going to recover, is my gut feel. And I definitely wouldn't be adding any more water, and I certainly wouldn't be adding any fertilizer to it. The best you could probably do is go through, cut it back, and hopefully it bounces back. That could be a croton actually, and if it is, it's in big trouble. So bit of light pruning maybe, but I wouldn't do any more than that just at the moment. It's that's in trouble. Keeping the list of photos coming through, Kay from Melbourne has sent us through. It's got black spots on a new nectarine tree. How can I treat it? Well, those black spots are not a fungus. They're lots of little aphids, and it's not an unusual thing to get peach aphid in on obviously nectarines. Remember the same group, the same plant, and the easiest thing to do is to use one of those contact sprays. So there's a bunch of them, but if it's only a small tree, you could probably get away with a little trigger pack and not have to pre-mix anything or mix anything and spray it over the foliage. Natural remedies, if you want to use something natural, you could use something like chili garlic spray, and you can make those up yourself if you want. It may or may not work. I'm not 100% sure. They look like they're pretty intense there. You do need to treat it though. That's my bit of advice. Glenda is in Perth, and let's have a look here. I've been trying to kill a bamboo that was at my house when I moved in. I've been mostly successful. I'm going to have a quick look here and see if there was no photo. So no, that's okay. Look, bamboo is one of those things. It really is a difficult thing to kill once it's on the move. So using a systemic herbicide is the way to go. There's probably a couple of them. The blackberry and tree killer is a pretty toxic herbicide, but it will take bamboo out pretty successfully, and as will the glyphosate-based fertilizers as well. So you can't go wrong there. Paulie, we're not sure where you're from. You were hoping to get some advice on getting rid of gnats. I've lost a lot of plants. It's interesting because generally fungus gnats wouldn't be taking your plants out. So that would suggest probably that you're seeing them, that you're maybe watering too much, Paulie. The trick is definitely to keep the soil on the dry side. Fungus gnats love a moist soil. They love bark, so love a lot of organic things. And if you really wanted to change the dynamic, I would go for the Osmocote indoor potting mix. I'd repot them all into that because that uses coir as its base, and fungus gnats won't breed in that, so they will go away. So that's a solution for those of you suffering that problem as far as they're moving through. Nikki is in the Gold Coast. We are all over the country today. We're up and down the East Coast, on the West Coast, been in South Australia. Nikki, you need a hedge about 6 metres tall and fast growing. Got red soil. Please don't say bamboo, as that's a pest. It has to be removed. And I tend to think that you're probably in a situation where you want to go for one of the lily pillies. Okay, so there's some really good varieties. At 6 metres tall, there is one called Bush Christmas. Is going to get 4 to 6 metres in its lifetime. But there are some others that are out there. I would suggest that you probably have a little bit of a look online at the options, but there's a whole bunch of those zyzigiums or lily pillies. That would be the perfect screening plant, and that's what I would recommend you go for. Melvina is in Sydney. Can I save my conifers? They're turning red. Now, it depends what the problem is, Melvina. I suspect that what you've got going on here is probably a situation. It could be one of two things. It could just be cold where you are, and if that's the case, conifers do get a bit of that sort of colour. But if they just turn like bright red and you're seeing all the foliage fall off, it's highly likely the foliage is dried out, and that's also a similar effect. I suspect that if you're at that point, there's not a lot you can do. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what else I can provide advice for you there. I would suggest what you do is take a photo, send it into your local garden centre. or send it to us. We'll have a look at it and try and provide you some more advice. Melissa is in Bundaberg, photos attached. Melissa, you've got a fringed wattle tree. They are a beautiful thing. They grow really, really quickly. And you want some tips on pruning it. Well, look, good news is they are very easy to prune. Once they've finished flowering, and you can see it there, it's a case of pulling them back. Now, you don't want to take them any more back than probably about 30% of the foliage to keep it nice and compact. But now is the time to prune it, basically. As soon as it's finished its flower, you can take it back at that point there. So don't be hesitant with wattles or pretty much any of the other natives to prune them. They do respond very well to pruning. Olia is in Melbourne. Another photo. Can somebody tell me if this is a weed or a plant? Now, I can't see that. Let's have a look here. Well, Ollie, I was looking at that photograph and I would think, I'm going to take a bit of a rough call on it, but I think that is a seedling hibiscus. Having once upon a time run a specialised hibiscus nursery, that's what a young seedling would look like as they're coming out. So it would make me think that you've probably got some other hibiscus nearby. And it looks to me like it's one of the Fijian style of hibiscus with the serrated edges on their leaves. All right, so how's that? We've had a bit of a run there straight away. We've got a lot of stuff to get through today, but one of the most important bits of advice you can get is advice on getting the very best results out of your tomatoes. So we asked our good friend Greg Neighbour to join us this morning, and Greg is one of the experts, a scientist based with the Love the Garden people. They are, of course, the Evergreen company that have some of those amazing brands like Scott's and Osmocote and all of those. Greg, welcome to the show.
Trevor, how are you?
Good, mate. How are you holding up? How's things in New South Wales? A little bit on the wet side today, by the sounds of it.
We're pretty dry here. It's a beautiful day right here in Sydney at the moment, actually, but wet coming, I believe.
Oh, well,
But
a bit of rain doesn't hurt this time of the year, does it?
no, very good.
So, mate, tell us a little bit about the important things for tomatoes. A lot of people don't realise that tomatoes, because they're such a vigorous plant, they have specific nutrient requirements. A couple of them, like iron and calcium, are vitally important, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. So, there's a few vegetable crops that suffer from something called blossom end rot, where you have a calcium deficiency, and that's zucchini, some capsicums, and of course tomato. So that's when people will mistakenly look at the bottom of the fruit and see a brown, rotting blossom end.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a fungus; it's actually blossom end rot. So calcium deficiency is what's driving that. And you mentioned earlier, actually, the need for consistent watering. So one of the things about calcium and some of the other elements for plants is that they need to be soluble for the plant to take them up. And so consistent watering, consistent moisture in the root system allows the continuous availability of nutrients to the plant.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have calcium in the soil, it can dry out, and therefore the plant can't get that calcium. And once you have calcium in rot, you blossom end rot, you can't reverse it.
It can't be fixed, can it? Once you start seeing the symptoms in a plant, that plant's pretty much it's pretty much history. You're not going to get any good fruit out of it.
Well, you can. It's the fruit that's on that won't be either edible
Any
or
good.
recoverable, but you can take that all off. And as you know, if you've got an indeterminate that is like a vine tomato, you could
Yeah.
continue to vine that, and you would do that by pulling it down the stake, letting the top continue to grow, and let the vine just sit on the ground.
Okay. So, mate, tell me, like there's probably a couple of different ways that people can go about this. One of them is obviously grow them in the ground. And I had somebody ask me the other day, what soil improver do I put into the ground if I want to get the best results out of tomatoes? Now, the reason they asked is that they don't have a lot of room. They'd grown a crop the previous year, and they were sort of saying, look, I know I'm kind of exposing myself to risks here. Sometimes just taking the soil out and replacing it with a really good the planting mix or even a potting mix is a good way to go?
Yeah, tomato often has a root cysts and root nematode problems in soils. If you have that, you can't really plant back into them for a couple of years. So growing them out of the ground, in pots or, as you say, remove the soil and replace with potting mix. We have a tomato, veg and herb mix that specifically has higher levels of iron, magnesium for dark green leaf and good fruit colour and flavour, and the calcium added at a significant level that allows that to prevent the blossom end rot issue.
Right. Now, tell me a little bit about the Scott's Osmocote potting mix. It's a professional blend, really, isn't it? It's if you've put all the goodness into it that professional growers would be using.
Exactly. So, we make recommendations to the professional market for a long time, and we brought that professional market formulation and technology to the consumer potting mixes that we offer. So there's controlled release fertilizers, obviously Osmocote at a professional level, as opposed to some potting mixes may suggest they have a controlled release in them, but the rates of addition are usually low. So apart from that, of course, formulating to the Australian standards for red tick premium, meaning that we therefore have all of the trace elements, the required water holding capacity, the airfill porosity, all of those things that so many consumers just sort of see potting mix as dirt and somehow or other it can grow a plant, but there's quite a lot of science goes into creating a good potting mix.
I don't think too many people understand the science that does go into creating that soil that's in a good bag of potting mix, and it's really important you do, because the potting mix is the key between success and failure. And you can buy cheap potting mixes that don't meet the Australian standard, and you end up with all sorts of problems. And then you can buy really good premium quality potting mixes, and the difference, when you see them growing side by side, and Greg, you do these trials all the time, I know. It's phenomenal, the cropping variation between a poor quality potting mix and a good quality potting mix, isn't it?
Oh, chalk and cheese, obviously, from the professional grower's perspective, that's money in his pocket as to how quickly and successfully he can grow a plant in a pot to sell. So we, do a lot of work to optimize that outcome for the professional grower. I think also that our fertilizer range reflects the same philosophy. So we have Osmocote that we've added an organic granule to. So Osmocote plus organic tomato, veg and herb has all of the same attributes. Now, that would be a better thing for the sands in Perth, for instance. So you're adding not only the nutrient that's not leachable, but also an organic component to help the soil.
Yeah, really important. I think in those. So if you are in a sandy soil, so you pointed out Perth, but the North Beaches of Sydney, Mornington Peninsula in Melbourne, all have those sorts of issues, don't they? And it's kind of one of those things where you don't want all that nutrient leaching below the roots. One is it's wasted, so it's wasted money. But two is your plants just don't benefit, and that's where controlled release is releasing small amounts every day, feeding the plant, and the plant needs small amounts every day for continual sustained growth.
Yeah, so with a fair amount or a good rate of Osmocote, you can grow a plant to maturity and fruit in pure sand. Uh,
Yeah,
and in fact, I've done that. So it sort of replaces the function of soil to a certain extent from a nutrient point of view by, as you say, just delivering a small amount continuously, which therefore is not available to be leached away. And you'll have 5 or 6 months continuous feeding from it.
yeah. Greg, just I know it's a slight diversion away from Scott's Osmocote potting mix, but talking about Osmocote, Osmocote comes in lots of different blends with specific nutrient manipulation to support growth of different types of plants, doesn't it?
Correct, yeah. So we kind of group plants, and it's funny sometimes people will ring and ask what particular osmocote they should use, and I'll recommend a rose for a hibiscus or whatever, but simply because the increased iron, magnesium, and those things that roses particularly thrive on is also something that another plant will thrive on.
Yep, I know.
So
I've just had a question come through from a friend of mine, Miley, who's just said gardenias sort of turned yellow at the very end of the winter period. The leaves have sort of lost their dark green luster, and they're another classic, aren't they? What would you recommend as far as osmocote goes for them?
so that's we refer to that as winter yellows in that group of plants.
Hmm.
And to tell you the truth, the best thing you can do is actually feed it at the end of summer. So if you
Hmm.
give it a good feed at the end of summer, particularly calcium and magnesium, then you'll have the stem of the plant, let's say, charged, enabling it to prevent winter yellows towards the end of winter. But if
Yep.
you do have it, the calcium, magnesium, and iron are the things that you're looking for. Mainly calcium, magnesium, actually.
And what would you recommend as far as the osmocote blends go for that?
We do have a gardenia acid loving
That's
plant.
that's Camellia azaleas and gardenias, right? That's the ideal
Correct.
scenario
Yeah.
for those sorts of plants.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, there's some pretty interesting stuff there. I think the key at the moment for people who are thinking about a good crop of tomatoes this summer is to make sure they're going into a really good quality soil. That's got to be vitally important, and obviously high levels of iron and calcium are going to help you avoid. Well, one is get some good sustained growth, but avoid that blossom end rot, which is one of those complaints that once you sort of get it, particularly with those varieties like Groslis and some of those bigger beefsteaks style of tomatoes. You if you haven't got it right now, you're going to have a problem. So get that into the soil straight away, and you should avoid those problems.
Absolutely. The again back to consistency. The soil is going to drive the consistency of the moisture and the availability of both water and the nutrients. With any of these crops, I keep mentioning calcium and magnesium together.
Yep.
It's an interesting soil chemistry point that you can have calcium, but if you don't have magnesium, the plant won't be able to get access to the calcium, and vice versa. So those two kind of go together.
Wow. The things we learned, Greg Neighbour. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. That's a really interesting insight and hopefully a good starting point for everybody to get out and get planting their tomatoes this weekend.
Beautiful. Good to speak to you.
Thanks, mate. Take care.
All right.
We'll see you
See you, Trev.
soon. We've got so many questions coming through. I am going to fly through them. A lot coming from Sydney, Melbourne, to be honest, from all over the country. We'll start in Perth. Hannah, how do I get more bees to pollinate my fruit and veg plants? I've planted a lot of native shrubs and plants, but not many bees seem to come. Well, it depends on what plants you are planting out. So you want things that are very high in pollen. What you tend to find at the moment is the bees are very active going through almonds and peaches, nectarines, plums, all those deciduous trees that are producing masses of flower. So they'll be a little bit more sort of gravitating towards that. Grevilleas, I have seen in the local area around the outside of me, grevilleas really are motoring this year. And some of those big, what we would call tropical grevilleas, the ones that come from sort of central New South Wales and even southern Queensland. They produce huge flowers in very large volumes, and they are a great source of nectar. And again, this is the key: is getting the nectar. If you want to bring in some herbs, things like borage is always a good additive as well. Hopefully that helps, Hannah. They should give you a few options there. Sandra is on the central coast of New South Wales. What are the best small plants for windowsills? Well, if you're looking for colour, you can go for things like the flowering tuberous begonias for indoors, or even the what I would call tree begonias. They're fabulous indoors. As far as remarkable plants for sort of a brightly lit position like that, but they could also do really well in a dark position is some of those dark foliaged ZZ plants. So the Zamiaculus, which There's a magnificent one I fell in love with, introduced by Banana Nurseries to Australia from Europe. And what it does is it produces these beautiful lime green new leaves, and then they turn black. And every lot of new foliage comes through as green, and the foliage itself around the outside is black. It really is quite a remarkable plant. So that's probably my suggestion as far as a couple of different options. If you're talking about outdoors, we'll look at some of your colourful flowering annuals. You can't go wrong. Hopefully that helps you, Sandra, on the central coast of New South Wales. We'll stay in Sydney for a moment, and coming through our YouTube channel is Zifa. Hello, Zifa. I planted a young male lemon, a navel orange, and a wonderful pomegranate a few years ago. Do I have any tips on how to care for them? Absolutely. Right at the moment, your citrus should be getting fed. Really important to give them a feed right now. Pomegranate won't hurt to feed it. They are growing, so it should be producing lots of foliage now, and soon after that foliage comes through, you'll see flower, and then obviously following the flower, you'll see fruit start to set. But feeding is probably the key at the moment. Now, Greg Neighbour previously mentioned this. This is a consistent message for everybody, and it's about consistency of soil moisture levels. So if you can keep your soil nice and moist consistently, you can't go wrong. Good way to go. Cherie is in Melbourne. Hello, Cherie. I have caterpillars on my grapevines. Help. That is a bit unusual. Now, Cherie, there is a naturally occurring insecticide. It's a bacterial based one. It's called Dipel, and it's the perfect one to spray over your grapes right at the moment. So you can pick that up from your local garden centre. You might even be able to get it online through the guys at Garden Express. I'll ask David a bit later on, but certainly Dipel is the way to go. Zoe is on the Gold Coast, so going up into some warmer weather. When and how do I prune a very old Tiburtina? Okay, Tiburtinas are a very woody shrub as they get older, so you don't want to prune them back too hard. So I would prune back a few branches hard, but leave others up and very lightly prune them. And then when you get new growth from where the old branches were pruned, you can look at pruning the other ones back down so that you can get it right down if you want to prune it hard. The ideal scenario is just to keep trimming the tops, and that will mean that you end up with a denser, bushier canopy. And with a denser, bushier canopy, you end up with more flowers. So, and Tiburtinas, if you don't know them, folks, beautiful blue sort of mauve flowers, just stunning, and they love really probably from Sydney up. All the way through till north of Brisbane, well and truly north of Brisbane. Um, just a gorgeous shrub, really is lovely. Tyson is in Melbourne. Hello. What fruits are the custard apples related to? Okay, well, custard apples are related to Rolinias. The cherimoyas from South America is the genus, so they sit in there. And soursop, they're probably the ones that they're most commonly related to. Hopefully that helps, Tyson. Janine is in Salmon Gums in WA. Can I spray my orange tree with white oil when it's in blossom? Can I suggest that you don't? I really, what you don't want to do is actually smother the flower and the pollen as the fruit's setting. You'll probably see a fair bit of fruit drop if you do that. So wait until it's finished flowering. It should be in flower right now en masse. Mine certainly are, and I don't spray them at all with anything. When they're in flower, you let them go through their natural process. Hannah is in southeast Victoria, just wondering how long it takes for a lemon to grow on a tree. Well, it depends on the type of lemon tree you've got. So there's a lot of variety out there. As a typical sort of thing, a Lisbon or probably a Lisbon lemon as an example, you're really talking about them producing fruit quite quickly. It's probably a 3 to 4 month period before they're actually starting to colour up. But maybe a Eureka will take a little bit longer than that, probably another 3 to 4 weeks, because the fruit tends to be bigger. That's all it is, and it really does get down to how warm the weather is. Hopefully that helps, Hannah. Colleen is in Canberra. Hello, Colleen. How can I stop whitefly on my plants? Big problem. A lot of people telling me they're experiencing this, particularly with their brassicas. So cabbage, cauliflower, kale will all start to see a fair bit of whitefly or green fly appear. And if you don't get on top of it, you will end up with some problems. I would suggest that you look at a systemic insecticide. They're pretty hard to get your hands on these days. Pop into my local Mitre 10 if I was you. You can still get Confidor through a lot of those stores. It's still one of my favourites, particularly if it's indoors, because it is systemic and it's one of the few things that really adequately treat whitefly. But there are others out there. MaxGuard is another member of the same family of chemicals, again, systemic. And then if you're going to look at contact sprays, have a talk to your local garden centre, because it's quite a difficult thing. And what you're trying to do is kill the adults and also control the larvae or the eggs as well. So it's a bit of a combined approach over a period of time. Deb is in Callaroo. That's here in WA. Weeds. Her husband spent days digging them up last year, and now they're back. And they're a little yellow daisy type with a black centre. How do we get rid of them for good? Well, mulching is the key. Or if they're in the lawn, and I suspect that the little daisy type you're talking about here is the Cape weed, which is an imported weed, but it is in mass flower just at the moment. If it's in lawns, pulling it up is probably the one solution. You can use some of those weed and feed sprays for those in lawns. But in garden beds, mulch over the top, get a big thick layer of mulch, at least that deep, all right? That's about 80 mil or so there, 80 to 100 mil, and you'll smother them out. Okay, let's keep rolling on. I did want to ask you actually, before we sort of go too far into answering questions and talking about plants of the week, catching up with my mate David at Garden Express. How have you been going with the Garden Gurus? We're in the middle of our spring series now. We will go right through till December. We're back this week with another episode. I'd love to hear your comments. If you're loving it, take a look at this week's clip. Now, Mary from Dalwallingu asked a question recently that, well, I thought we'd answer with doing it in my garden and showing you how I overcome it. New growth on the rose is smothered in aphids, and have a look at this. Not an aphid to be seen. So how am I avoiding it without spraying chemicals? Because I do not spray them. Well, it all gets down to the way you feed them. And what I'm using is a complex fertilizer full of nutrients, lots and lots of micro and macros that ensures the plant is really strong. And even though it's got this soft growth, it's still so difficult to sort of pierce. You'll find the aphids just won't go here. They'll fly next door and enjoy their roses. And the key gets down to the food. This and more brilliant gardening advice is exactly what you're going to find this weekend on the Garden Gurus. Make sure you check out the TV show on Channel 9. And what do you reckon about that, hey? Aren't they beautiful? That is lavender. Now, this is a particular type, the Stoches form. Stoches is best known probably as the Spanish lavender or the fringed. They have these beautiful big petals on top of their flowers, and then you'll see under basically in these bracts, lots and lots of little tiny flowers inside as they come through. Interestingly enough, these ones have become really, really popular because there's so many different variations of the flower colour, from quite a blue through to these soft pinks. The interesting thing about this particular type of lavender is it's probably not the one to deliver those rich lavendery scents throughout the year. The foliage, whilst it has that lavender smell, is not as rich in the oils as some of the other varieties, like the French. So this one's known as the Spanish, but you've got the French and the English, and they're really quite strong. You only need to brush past them and you can smell it, and it's great. These guys look spectacular, and springtime is when they're really at their best. I really do love them. You do find that the flower itself is actually quite a rich source. So whilst they're in flower, you will get that lovely perfume. But Stoiches or the Spanish lavender, just one of the many options that you, one, can be planting now, or two, be appreciating. Put them in pots, bring them in close to the house. They really are a lovely plant. And we were just talking about bees, and the bees do love these plants. So something to consider. Now, we are sort of thinking outdoors most of the time, this time of the year, but the biggest trend in recent years and for some period of time has been indoor plants. And no wonder, so many of us are still in lockdown, so many of us are spending more time at home. And that in itself is an opportunity. And this is where people have started collecting unusual plants. There's so many unusual variegated monsteras that you couldn't find previously, or unusual leaf philodendrons and so on, that people are now collecting and putting huge value on. In fact, recently I went through a process with a friend of mine who's got a garden centre, and he was pointing out that there were a number of plants being sold online through various online outlets for well over $1,000 for a single plant, which is incredible. But it shows how we value things when we start to recognize their beauty. And there is one plant that I just love. It's called the caladium. Now, it's a tropical plant. I do love the tropics. For those of you who get into places like Bali and Thailand and walk around and just admiring the foliage plants, I really do. I'm one of those people. I really do appreciate them so much. And one other person I know who appreciates them that much is a guy by the name of David Van Berkel. David, welcome back to the show. How are you going?
I'm going really good, Trevor, and yourself?
Very good, mate. Now, I'm very excited about this plant. I've done something on TV for you with it. It is a ripper. Tell us about Caladium Thai Beauty.
It's an incredible plant, Trevor. It's just an amazing story. On the internet, we've listed it with the story about my mate Steve, who brought this crop to the country about 20 years ago. Has been picking some foliage off of these plants, and because of this heightened sense of people looking for exquisite, exotic, as something unique, Steve was happy enough to work with us to release some of these plants into the wild to our customers. So really excited to be presenting this, and I thank you for the effort that you did. And this is...
It's completely unique, isn't it? It's the foliage. I'm not sure if we've got some vision of the foliage of this plant, but I'll try and put up a photo to show just how spectacular it is. And I was talking to a friend on the weekend, and she's a florist, and she said that they sell a single leaf from this plant. We're showing you some caladiums here, not the one in question, but she was saying that this particular one, Thai Beauty, which is an absolute collectible, they sell the foliage, a single leaf, for between $5 and $10.
Yeah, and look, that's the nature of some of these rare and beautiful things. And listening to what you were saying about some of those internet sites, I was talking to a friend of ours, Clive Larkman, who does a lot of importing of products from overseas, and he has a client that lists things for $3,000 and delists them when the price gets below $500.
Wow.
So just bringing in unique plants from around the world, limited quantities, going through that enormous process of up to 2 years to bring a product through a quarantine system to prove that it's free of diseases and all of those things. So there's a fair effort in the background to introduce a new product from another country.
So this was 18 to 20 years ago. This was introduced from Thailand and has only been used for foliage, basically supply to the cut flower industry, right?
Yeah, look, exactly. From a commercial point of view, Trevor, look, and sometimes people can cheat the system, and there might be a few bulbs bought back in handbags at different times. And if you go back 20 years, maybe our quarantine wasn't perfect. We have seen, chips of this plant on the internet in times gone past where they just take a little sliver of it. But this is the first time we've been able to go to quarantine states with a legitimate product. And this is a mature bulb as well, Trevor. They're not very big, probably the size of a 20-cent piece, maybe a 50-cent piece at its biggest.
Yep.
So the bulbs that we've initiated are mature bulbs that will be ready to make babies already next year or the year after.
That's fantastic. So they're going to you'll start off with the initiated bulb. So this is your starting point. Where should people grow this? How do they do it, Dave? This is part of your signature collection. How do they get the best results?
So the best results is to keep it warm. As you said, it's a tropical plant, so we just don't want the temperatures to drop, say, below 15 degrees. So if you're in Tasmania, you certainly don't want to put it outside or on the patio. Certainly an indoor plant to keep nice and warm, a bit of morning light or ambient light, so not direct sunlight. So we've initiated the plant, which is saving, between 4 to 10 weeks, depending on what climate you're in. The cooler climate, the more time we've saved. Because 6 weeks ago, we started this plant on a little bit of heat in this nice open mix to get the roots growing and allow those first leaves to come up. So if you take this tube, you pot it up into the pot that you want. As you said on the episode on the weekend,
Yep.
a beautiful pot for indoors, for in your home, to enjoy this plant as it produces more and more leaves over the coming months.
David, it's pretty incredible. Now, obviously, you're selling them as bulbs, so there'll be little bulblets come off, as the plant matures and grows. They do die down each year. Is that the nature of this particular plant?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's part of the learning curve that maybe a novice gardener will have to go through. Is that the foliage will come up, will keep going through till probably the autumn of next year, and then as those cooler months kick in, the bulb will go dormant again for probably a 12-week period, and it will be looking for that warmth, maybe a little grow tunnel if you're in a cold environment, just to reinitiate the root development. And once the roots start to find that moisture, those leaves will come up again.
Interesting. Okay, well, this is obviously a very, very collectible plant and pretty rare to get your hands on. Are people going to be able to get their hands on this easy?
For a short time only, Trevor. So we initiated quite a few. We wanted to make sure that we could meet the demand. You're always unsure on something like this, which is again, as I said, for a novice gardener, maybe not the first plant that they might go for, but given the environment that we're in and the amount of people taking up, collecting plants, we've initiated quite a few bulbs. They're selling very fast, which is a great thing, and we've probably got another week or two of opportunity for people to get their hands on one.
Fantastic. Okay, well, look. The way to do it is to jump online, go straight to gardenexpress.com.au, place your order while stocks last. You will be able to supply them. And then hopefully, if anybody's missed out, mate, you'll find some more stock. You'll have a chat to your mate Steve, and we'll end up with a few extras to be able to look after our friends who are tuned in.
Exactly, Trevor. Look, we'll have some more stock again next year. It's just that balance between the crop that he's got going for the foliage that he's picking, but also releasing some to lucky for us to be able to release to our customers. So they're coming on in stages. We're getting a delivery each week from Steve. He's caring for the plants right up until they arrive. So this first lot that we got arrived last night on a truck from Sydney at 6:00. We grabbed it off the back of the truck, so to speak, put it into a poly tunnel where it stayed warm during the night. We're wrapping it up. We're putting a little bit of felt wrap around it to keep it warm in the transit, express posting it so it's really quickly from Steve up in Sydney all the way to the consumers across the country.
Awesome, mate. Look, it's such an interesting thing. David, please keep doing this. Please keep collecting those rare and unusuals. A lot of us love doing that and having those special plants in pots in our gardens. It is quite a cool thing. So Dave's signature collection, if it keeps building with all of these sorts of plants, we should all end up with a little bit of Dave in our backyard every day, huh?
That would be pretty cool. The white one that you pictured earlier, we've got some of those possibly coming online next year. We've got in a couple of years, just a bit of a tip, we've got a beautiful hippeastrum from South America. With a little bit of variegation in the foliage. So we're hoping in about 2 years that will come online. And I've constructed 3 greenhouses to keep the specialty range that I'm falling in love with and collecting from some of those old timers, mate, that are maybe getting quite old time, and trying to build them up, because there's some really unusual plants from bygone eras that we're really missing out on.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look, you're doing a great job, mate. Thanks so much for joining us today. Another great
My
deal.
pleasure.
Gardenexpress.com.au. Dave and the team will get them delivered direct to your door. That's the best thing about this. All right. We're getting to the end of the run, so we've got 15 minutes to go. I am going to go through a speed round of answering your questions, and I hope that I can help you with your problems. Julie has got a ripper question, and I'll tell you why. because we're about to solve these problems with some friends of mine who are at the Caversham Wildlife Park. Julie is in the Blue Mountains at her daughter's house for lockdown. She's got possums eating all the seedlings and especially the sunflowers. Now, what's the best natural deterrent for possums? Right, I'll give you an answer now, but we will be featuring these sorts of questions and answers coming up into the future. The first thing you want to do is try and set up some housing for your possums, and the ideal one is hollow logs on spaces away in the back of the garden, away from the areas that you are seeing them come and eat this produce. The second thing is that they're coming to it because it's young and it's sweet and it's delicious. So if you can offset that food for them and feed them in another area of the garden, they'll probably leave your sunflowers alone. And the third one is you can dust the sunflowers themselves with chili and white pepper, and you'll find that'll make the possum sneeze. Their noses are quite sensitive, and that'll sort of act as a deterrent without actually hurting them. So I'm going to give you those three solutions. I'll be very interested to see what Deb and Dave and the team at Caversham actually share as far as their tips and hints go into the future. All right, that's you, Julie, in the Blue Mountains. Let's stay in Sydney. Lynette, hello. Evening primrose is invading my lawn. Help. Evening primrose is invading your lawn. That's quite an interesting thing. What I would suggest you do, Lynette, is mow on a regular basis. Right at the moment, if you're mowing low and mowing twice a week, that'll get rid of that very, very quickly. There is obviously, selective herbicides you can spray. You could do the weed and feed and it will knock it back, but it's up to you. Michelle is in Ipswich in Queensland. Hello, Michelle. Please help me get rid of my mealybugs. They're on my succulents and also have root mealybugs as well. So mealybug gets right into the leaf axis and into all these areas where it's very, very hard to control the pest, and it will get down into the root system. And when you're at that point, you'll see plants start to suffer. Mealybug itself is a tiny little bug. You can barely notice it, but it's white and fluffy, and it does get into real plague proportions. The only real solution here, you could try soaking them with a horticultural oil, so white oil, and that's fine as long as it doesn't get hot. What it will do is it kind of gets in and suffocates the mealybug and scale insects as well. That's the first option, probably not my preferred. My preferred would be to use a systemic. And once upon a time, you could get Confidor tablets and pop them into the ground. Now, as I said to you, I've got a funny feeling some Mitre 10 stores still sell it, but it is becoming rare to get your hands on. But what you're looking for is a systemic insecticide, ideally, that works its way through the roots and the foliage and kills off these pests. Rhonda is in Newcastle in New South Wales. I'm setting up raised garden beds for tomatoes, etc. Is it okay to add seaweed to the soil? Do I need to ensure it rises, that it's rinsed thoroughly to reduce the salt? No, you can throw it in as you like. The salt will be a mineral nutrient. You're not going to have to worry about too salty a soil or anything like that as a consequence of throwing seaweed in. Good way to go if you can get your hands on it. Carol and Kel in Lake Macquarie in New South Wales. What shrubs or trees can I plant around a septic tank? I want to screen that corner, but I need something with non-invasive roots. You absolutely do. So biggest mistake you could do is put any of the members of the ficus family in around there. You don't want any of the figs. So avoid them like the plague. Probably the ones that you want is one of the more compact forms of lily pilly. They really are. I tend to use them a lot, but you're in Lake Macquarie. It's kind of the home territory of the lily pillies, and you'll find that there's some wonderful varieties available in garden centres. Staying in New South Wales, we've got a few coming from New South Wales. It's great to have you join us. Karen is in Newcastle. You came to us via YouTube. Can you tell me why my Lincoln roses turn purple? So it's Mr. Lincoln. It's turned purple. Would it be because it's gone back to the rootstock? Absolutely. I would say that's exactly what you're seeing there. You're seeing the rootstock producing flower, and I would suggest to you that you might want to have a look down the stem and see where it's growing out. So effectively any growth below the graft, and now this will be, so what you'll kind of have is you'll have your roots, you'll have your soil here, you'll see this node, this like nodule, and then the plant should be growing over there and above, and that should be your Mr. Lincoln rose. Anything below that, however, is probably going to be the rootstock. And I reckon that that's what you're seeing producing flower. Now, you should be able to pull it away, hopefully, and that will force all the good sap and energy to go up into the Mr. Lincoln and get it growing again. I hope that helps. Upall is in Tamworth in New South Wales. Can you grow Waratah from seed? Absolutely. That's how they grow in the wild. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. But look, if you've got the right conditions, and that is consistent moisture level, reasonable leaf litter on the surface of the soil, and a soil that's free draining, you should get them to produce a few plants at least. Brianna is in Moonee Ponds in Victoria. Hi, Brianna, and everybody in Victoria. What is the best food for frangipani? They're bare stalks at the moment. They're dormant, and really you don't really want to feed them. Where are we now? October, probably till the first or second week of November. At that point in time, you want a good all-round consistent fertilizer, and that'll get them off on their start. So general garden fertilizer is actually not a bad way to go with frangies to get them boosted and growing strongly once the weather warms up, and that's the key, Brianna. Lorraine is in the south coast of New South Wales. What's the best spray for grapes to stop mildew? Right, so mildews are a big problem, and what we've learnt over the years and what growers will often do is that they will alternate sprays, and there's a few different ones that you can use. So Mancozeb is probably the one that I would use the most, but you don't want to be constantly using it. So going across to one of the sulfur-based sprays early in the season before you get too much foliage will help control some of them and also keep some of the mites away. But what you want to do is be alternating your your fungicides through the season, Lorraine. It's really important. So go and talk to your local garden centre. They'll have a few different options for you, and just alternate. So use one, then go back to the other, use one, go back to the other. And you probably find that if you did 3 or 4 different sprays, mixed, well, 2 sprays, but mixed across 3 or 4 spray processes, you won't see any mildew. But it is a big problem if you don't do something about it. Francis is in Corumba in Victoria. Are the leaves of artichokes edible, of the globe artichoke? Look, I don't think they are. I've not tried them before. Certainly it's the flower that we're looking for. So that flower bud is the key. And even once the flower's open, it's too far gone. So flower buds would be your focus, Francis. But that's not saying that people don't pickle them or do something with them. I'd love to hear anybody who's got some advice on artichoke leaves. It'll probably be the new little growth shoots, I would imagine, if that was the case. Chelsea's in Canberra. Are there any varieties of frangipani I can grow in Canberra that'll survive the extreme temperatures in winter and summer? So no problem with extreme heat, big problem with extreme cold. And the one that is the hardiest is the cream with the yellow centre. Probably the most common and definitely the hardiest. And it's one of those things that you could pretty much do anything. As long as you get a cutting in, you could put them into the ground. Again, I wouldn't do it until November in Canberra. You don't want any frosts and you want the ground to be relatively warm. And then you want to feed it and water it consistently all the way through summer. Encourage it to grow as much as you can. Ideally in the first year after, the first winter after, keep it protected, and then the second year it should toughen up and hopefully survive for you, Chelsea. Good luck. Colin's in Perth. My kale is covered in bugs. What can I do? Kale is a pretty common pest, or has a common pest at the moment, which is the whiteflies. We talked about them just before. And again, you need to actually spray and kill the eggs, the larvae or little nymphs, and also obviously the fly itself. What you tend to find is contact sprays will kill the fly, maybe kill off the larvae, but not kill off the eggs. So it's either consistent spraying or try and find yourself a very short-term systemic insecticide. Talk to your local garden centre, Colin. It'll help a lot. Christy is in Mount Helena. That's still in WA, so that's great. Christine, thanks for joining us. My daughter has a wisteria that's been cut back. She wants to remove it and possibly plant it elsewhere on a property. Can we move it without killing it? Well, they're definitely on the grow now, so they're growing quite quickly. If you get it out while soil moisture levels are pretty moist, and also whilst we're getting cooler weather still, you're in with a chance. But you'd want to do it pretty much straight away in the next week. I wouldn't leave it any later than that. Laura is in Hervey Bay in Queensland. What veggies should I be planting now? Well, there's a huge range of veggies, but you don't want to be going for the cooler climate ones. So if you're going to do any of the onions, so any of the members of the onion family, doesn't matter which ones, you can do those, but don't worry about garlic. That's a winter crop. As far as vegetables go, look at the leafy vegetables from here on. So your lettuces and all the different variants of those too. You can do some of the Asian cabbages, bok choy, pak choy, some of those things, and they're very quick crops before you move into the summer. And then once you're into summer, the summer crops, tomatoes we talked about earlier on, capsicum, eggplant, zucchinis, all of those need to be going into the ground now. Hopefully that helps, Laura. Leanne is in Sydney. I'm in the northern suburbs on bushfire prone land. Is there a better type of mulch to use that's less flammable or flame retardant? You know, pretty much anything organic is going to be subject to potential burn. What you really want to do is try and keep that mulch nice and moist. And if you do that, then the risk of it burning is actually dramatically reduced. And also scorching of the ground is also reduced as well, which means that your plants don't set back. Leanne, that's probably my bit of advice there. Robert, not sure where you're from, Robert. We've got a problem with a row of viburnum trees that are continually attacked with powdery mildew. It's interesting. All of the treatments contain some sulfur, which experts say keep that away from. Can you? I would be very questioning whether you are getting powdery mildew. What I think you're getting, and it depends where you live, Robert, and this is why it's important you let us know. But if you're in one of the drier, warmer summer climates, I would say it's highly likely that you are getting red spider mite, causing the silvering of the foliage, and that is a very common problem with viburnums. Now, you don't treat that really necessarily with an insecticide. You probably would want to bring in some predatory mites. Now, you can get them online, the goodbug.com.au or something like that. Do a Google and find out the good bug, and you'll find these sites that sell predatory mites, and I reckon that's what your problem is. Be very surprised if it's powdery mildew. Margaret's in Belgrave. I've got a peony. I have a peony tree. Can I propagate the seeds? If so, what needs to be done? If you've got a peony that's producing seed, absolutely. Now is the time to be taking them and collecting them, but put them into a paper bag and make sure they're completely dry. So you might want to leave them for maybe a month or so before you go planting them. And then as the weather gets warm, scatter them over the top of a tray of seed raising mixture, and then water it in. Maybe just put a little bit of a layer over the top of those seeds of that, but you don't want a thick layer. You only want a very small, thin layer. Water them, then get some Glad wrap and Glad wrap over the tray. All right. So what you're trying to do is keep your humidity up and leave it like that for 2 weeks before you unwrap it. Then put it out into a shaded position, and you'll watch those little seeds. They'll germinate, and then over the next 12 months, I would let them establish in the tray before winter. Then I would break them up in wintertime and take them and plant them either into pots or out into the garden. There's a lot of information in a very short period of time. I hope that helps, Margaret. Carolyn is in the Central Coast of New South Wales. I have what I think is rust, brown circles on the back of leaves. How will I get rid of it and also prevent it? So rust that does sound like it's rust. It tends to affect all sorts of plants. The mallows are very, very affected by it this year, I've noticed. So what I would suggest you do is look at a specialised rust herbicide. There are a few of them available in garden centres. You just want to talk to your local garden centre about it for a start. Most of them have click and collect, which means you can talk to them, order it, pick it up in the car park if you can't visit them. But the important thing is the prevention of this into the future. So rusts tend to be active when there's moisture at night or a lot of moisture during the day, which you can't control if it's rain. But you can make sure you're not running sprinklers at any other time. And thinning them out. So thinning your plants out to allow airflow through really does make a big difference. So tends to be a lot worse when there's very poor airflow or high humidity. Hopefully that helps. Jenny is in Coffs Harbour. Due to extreme acid soil, I've spread liquid lime over the garden bed. My question is, should I dig up the bed, spread compost, and how long before I can replant native trees? Acidic soils will benefit definitely from having lime, and probably the one that you want to look at is something like garden lime or dolomite. Those two pretty good at adding into the soil. They'll improve the structure. They should help buffer or balance the pH, but compost will really be your true buffer. So if you can get yourself a good organic compost and dig it into the topsoil of the garden beds, it'll make the world of difference. And you're probably talking about a month or so before you'll be able to start to think about testing that there's been a change in the pH, which you can take soil samples into your local garden centre and ask them to do it for you, or you can do it yourself, and then look at planting once you've got your pH somewhere between 5.5 and 7.4 or so. Really, 5.5 to 7 is the ideal scenario. 6.5 is probably my preference. Okay, let's stay with extreme soil challenges because Port Kennedy in WA has them. Julie has written in. Julie, you've been struggling trying to eradicate weeds in your back lawn. One in particular is a clover-like weed with runners and little yellow flowers. Now, you've used Yates liquid weed and feed on it 3 times in the last 6 weeks. They're not dying off, but all the other weeds have done, and your lawn is a cooch as well as buffalo mixed in. So first thing is weed and feeds, use the buffalo weed and feed sprays. That's the key. The type of weed you've got is a creeping oxalis. It's a bit of a terrible pest. It can be sprayed out with select herbicides. So selective herbicides will tend to take those things out. You do need to talk to your local garden centre about what they have in range that'll allow you to do it. But it'll be a pre-mix. Not a pre-mix, a mix you have to mix up in a watering can, spray it over or drench it over the soil, and that will take it out. But that is a particularly bad pest. Lorraine in Mollymook in New South Wales, can I cut back my spider lilies? I'm not sure why you'd be cutting them back unless they have already finished flowering. It's a good question. I'm not sure why that would be the case. Most of them would be getting planted at the moment. Mine are just really growing lots of lush foliage and are about to start producing flower. So I wouldn't be cutting them back is my preference, unless you're splitting them up and moving them or doing something with them. How do I get rid of aphids? Julie, one is feed with a fertilizer that's very complex. So it'll strengthen up the cell walls of the plant, and that'll make it a little more difficult for aphids to penetrate. 2 is that you can spray, so you can use chili garlic sprays or pyrethrum-based sprays at the moment. That'll take them out. Irene's got a ripper question from Bundaberg in Queensland. Got a problem with scrub turkeys. I thought they were cute at first, but they're a nightmare. Scratching up the garden beds, digging holes, uprooting my plants. Anything to help besides relocating them. No, I don't really have anything for you. Not quite sure how we control that, Irene. Maybe some of our people who've been listening today can provide us with a little bit more advice. I will ask this question of our friends at Caversham Wildlife Park because I'm about to do a series of stories with them. Maybe they can help us in keeping them away. I suspect the advice they will give you is to give these guys food in a certain area that keeps them away from the beds that you want to protect. Short of covering your beds, I don't think you can do any more. That's all I can provide at this point in time, Irene. Great problem to have in a way, but not if you want to have a lovely garden bed. I've got the same issue with rabbits at the moment. I'll tell you that story at another time because that's all we've got for today's session of the Garden Gurus Live. There were so many questions coming in today. It was red hot. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions, but I promise you we'll get to your questions first thing next Monday when we're back doing this again. Lachlan's going to send a message off to our seed and book winners straight after the show. So just watch your inbox or watch your feed, and you'll see yourself come through there. Garden Gurus is, of course, playing on Channel 9 every Saturday. You need to check your local TV guides at the moment because there's a few different times. But, we're getting fantastic feedback. And I'd love to get your feedback on the show. If you've got ideas, you've got stories you'd like us to look at, we would love to do them. We'd love to support you, and it's an extension of what we're doing here with the Garden Gurus Live. Remember, if there's any information that we didn't answer today or that you haven't seen on the show, but you're looking for some answers, visit our website. It's thegardengurus.tv. It's a wonderful resource. It's got videos, fact sheets, great links to other sites, other areas to help you. And of course, there's always our programs, which you can also watch on the YouTube channel, thegardengurus.tv. Or if it's a more recent episode from the current series, check out 9now.com.au. You can listen to today's live stream. We are doing podcasts now with these sessions. They are great sessions to have a bit of a listen to if you can't We currently sit, I think, at number 5 as far as the most popular podcasts in Australia when it comes to gardening. And you can basically get these podcasts by going to Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Audible. And the good news is we are back next Monday for another great session of the Garden Gurus Live. Daylight saving kicks in this weekend, so we'll be back at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So remember, it's daylight time. And WA viewers will be starting at 9 a.m. So we're a little bit earlier here in the West. Not such a big problem, I'm sure, for most of you. I'm Trevor Cochrane. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Thanks so much for your support of the Garden Gurus. Happy gardening. Have a great week.
This show is brought to you by the Garden Gurus and Evergreen Garden Care. Evergreen Garden Care and their market-leading brands are some of the most trusted consumer brands within the garden care market. They produce high-quality garden care products designed to help people create their own green oasis. Whether it's a garden, a balcony, or potted indoor plants, they want to inspire anyone, anywhere to be able to easily create and maintain their own garden. To find out more about Evergreen Garden Care, head to www.lovethegarden.com. Garden Express are Australia's leading mail order gardening service, offering a wide range of quality garden products. Each week on the Garden Gurus Live, the team at Garden Express will share a weekly offer. So make sure after today's show you jump online and visit their website. Visit the Garden Gurus online store and browse through a collection of high-quality, German-made Wolfgarten tools. You'll also find a range of books with information to help create and maintain a beautiful garden. You can also access the online store on the Garden Gurus Facebook page.